to Interplay Conversations in Music. This is your host, Michael Shapiro, with a friend of 50 years, Malcolm Singer, coming to us from his home in London. Hello, Malcolm.
Hello, Michael. Lovely to see you.
It's great to see one of my oldest friends, as it were. Well, we first met in Siena in 1974 in the summer. But before we get to that, I want to talk about your trip coming up in November. It is, yes?
That's right. Yes, I'm flying in on November the 4th, the day before your elections.
Oh God. Well, we shall pray for the future of the world the next day. I'll talk to you the day after. In any event, Malcolm, you are being played a new piece inspired by your home, London, by the Dayton Philharmonic, conducted by your very old friend Neil Gittleman. So let's talk about Malcolm Singer and Neil Gittleman meet under the aegis of.
We met in Fontainebleau and in Paris. We both studied with Mademoiselle Boulanger together. And I have a spoken fugue, which gets performed quite a lot, where the words of the fugue describe the structure of the fugue. And we must have performed it in Fontainebleau. I've forgotten this. But many, many, many moons later, during the COVID lockdown, when everyone started zooming around the world, I got this email from Neil saying, "I'm doing a podcast for the supporters of the Dayton Philharmonic, and I'm talking to them about fugue. And can I have a copy of your fugue, and can I use it?" So that's how we got back in touch after many, many years. Anyway, he spoke to me, and I spoke to his people in Dayton, and he used my fugue in that. And then after that, he said, "I've got this idea for a London concert that I really want to do before I retire. I want to do the Vaughan Williams London Symphony, Symphony Number 2, and I would like you to write a new kind of overture of some description, somehow linked to London, using the same orchestration as the Vaughan Williams, which is a big orchestra with triple winds, etc." And I think the original idea was to have a Haydn London Symphony as well, but that went out of the program, and wonderfully, we have Beethoven's First Piano Concerto with Emil Naumov, who was also a pupil with Mademoiselle. He was a child prodigy. He's about a decade younger than us. We were all there as postgraduates, and he was the little protege studying with her. And Emil's now professor of piano in Indiana. He's coming to play Beethoven, so it should be a wonderful
That's
event.
great. Now, describe your piece. It's London.
Well, I wouldn't say it was a programmatic piece exactly. When I originally wrote to Neil, I said it's going to have to be a pre-Brexit London piece, not a post-Brexit London piece, because London in the last 20 years has been incredibly vibrant. We had the Queen's Jubilee, we got the Olympics, and the City of London, in terms of business, has been thriving. And my fear is that Brexit has slightly changed all that, and London it's still a pretty good place to live and work. But
So your
so
horns are open, not muted.
a bit of both, but
Oh,
it's in some ways it's inspired by the skyline and the energy of the city. So there are slow passages with very large range, orchestral range, from the very top of the piccolo to the double bass, and then there are some really energetic, fiery passages. And it's about a 7-minute opener. It was great fun to write, and to be able to write for triple winds and everything, and a big brass section is a joy.
how large is the brass section?
The brass is 4 horns, 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, and bass trombone, and then up to 3 percussionists. And I've added a piano, which Vaughan Williams doesn't have, but I got permission from the orchestra, from the commission, to add a piano as well.
That's splendid. And to be with your friend from so many years back.
Yes, and he's a wonderful musician, wonderful conductor, and it'll be a pleasure to be there for the rehearsals and to talk to the audience and what have you.
Now, we met in Siena in 74 because you were studying with Franco Donatoni composition, and I was trying to get into the Franco Ferrara conducting class unsuccessfully. And I do remember that after that, I think you went to study with Boulanger, right?
Yeah, so I went to Siena actually, first of all, in '73, spent the whole of the summer there. I would like you, I thought I would go on the conducting course, but like you, I discovered it was not all it was cracked up to be, and I immediately met Donatoni, and that year his assistant was Giuseppe Sinopoli, who went on to become a great conductor. But
Oh my god.
he was Franco's composition assistant. So I had
Mm,
an amazing summer in '73 and went back in '74,
that's what we
uh,
met.
where we when we met, and. But in the summer of '73, the Chigiana Settimana at the end of the summer course, Ligeti had come for 1 week to talk about his music. And I'd met Ligeti, spent a whole week with Ligeti in the summer of '73. Summer
Ah,
of '74, Dalla Piccola came just before he died. Um,
why did I
this
miss this?
this
When
was
did
the very end of August, the beginning of September. I spent
I
all
was
the
already rehearsing in Zurich Opera. Oh,
absolutely, and then I came to visit you in Zurich. I
mm,
remember it well. So,
amazing.
anyway, as it transpired, I got a French government scholarship to go to Paris when I finished. I was at university at Cambridge, and so these were my summer holidays from university when I was in Siena, and I learnt much, much more in the summer than I learnt all year at university. So those
What
summers
did
were.
you read what did you read at Cambridge?
I read music, but reading music in the early '70s was a bit of a hit and miss affair.
Mm.
There were, I mean, in retrospect, there were some very good things about it, but there were also a lot of things lacking in the education I got there.
I agree. I remember very well Columbia and Juilliard lacking. What I did not get what I got in private lessons with Ellie Siegmeister in particular, who was a boulangerie person as well. I
Yes,
got all those exercises, but like, I don't know, 50 years after he did.
yeah. Well, I mean, the good things I got from Cambridge was one, I got a scholarship to go to Siena in the summer, paid for by Cambridge, so that was jolly
Ah,
good.
that's
And
really good.
I formed my own student orchestra, as everyone did at Cambridge, and I was conducting every week with a student orchestra. So I got to learn my conducting skills by standing up in front of a, you
Well,
know,
you're
a
a very I've seen
reasonable.
you work. You're a very fine conductor.
Well, thank you very much. But that was all begun with my Cambridge days, and then you make friends because it's not a conservatoire. You make friends with people who are not musicians. So I've still got very good friends from my Cambridge days who are mathematicians and historians and scientists and what have you.
Yeah.
And the course does cover a vast amount of music. So later in life, when you suddenly get interested in 14th century Spanish music, you kind of know where to go because it kind of gets you kind of remember something about it. So there were good things about it. Anyway, I got the scholarship and went to Boulanger. And so I went straight from that summer in '74 to her to Paris.
I remember this. Now let's discuss the first day of you alone with Mademoiselle Boulanger. I've always wondered about that.
Well, it wasn't the very first day I'd met her because I'd actually met her as a teenager when she came to London. I mean, I always say the biggest break in my career was when I was about 14. She was supposed to come to the Royal Academy of Music, where I used to go on Saturdays, and I was supposed to play the Bach Prelude and Fugue in E major from Book Two for her. Unfortunately, she was sick and didn't come because she would have crucified me because I've seen her give masterclasses on that piece many times. However, she came the next year, and the Academy asked me to play one of my own compositions to her.
Ah,
So,
safe.
and this very old lady said, "Oh, you must go to university, and then you must come and study with me in Paris." And it kind of looked like she was about to die that week, but she was kind of a white witch, and that's exactly what happened. I went to university, and then I went to study with her. And the first lessons in Paris, I would play my compositions to her. And after 3 or 4 lessons, she said, "Well, you're a composer, and I'd love to see your music when you're writing it. But as a musician, you're completely unprepared." Um, and I knew this because I'd been moaning at Cambridge that I wasn't getting the kind of foundations in terms of ear training and harmony and counterpoint. I could kind of do it because I was musical. I could fudge it, but I didn't
Okay, but
really
no.
understand it. So I went right back to square one with Mademoiselle, and we started right back at the beginning of harmony and counterpoint, all the ear training with Mademoiselle Dieudonné. So I would see Mademoiselle Boulanger um, 3 times a week. So I'd have my one-to-one lesson with her. I'd go to the analysis class that everyone went to on Wednesday afternoon, and then I was one of the ordained students to go to Black Saturday, and Black Saturday was keyboard harmony.
Mm.
Um, Where there were about 6 of us. Emil was there. I think Neil might have been there as well, and she would just put us through our paces and destroy us. You came out of Saturday morning a complete wreck from trying to do keyboard
Right.
harmony with them.
Yeah,
And
with
then
6th grade.
a lesson with Mademoiselle Dieudonné as well. So I got a lot of tuition in those 2 years I was in
I wanna
Paris.
talk about the counterpoint because I'm really fascinated about that. When I was studying with Siegmeister, he actually had the exercises that he did with her when he was there
Mhm,
with Copland, and I had 5 years of it. 1 year of just melody writing and nothing else,
mhm.
and 4 years of 16th century species counterpoint. That's
Good,
all we did,
great.
and we started with the Cantus Firmus, 1 and then
Yes,
in
yes.
1
Yeah, yeah,
response above below.
yeah.
Okay, then they got more responses and 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. But he was, a professional composer of great renown at that time, and he put me through the ringer because he felt he had to put me through the same ringer that he got put through
Yeah.
her, and he was
It
with her for 4 years, I think,
it
which
trains the brain, it trains the muscles of the brain. You know, my analogy always I'm very big on what you call soccer and that we call football,
I know
and
you have
football.
season tickets.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm an Arsenal fan and I'm there regularly. But footballers don't play football every day. They train every day. They'll have one day in the gym. They'll have one day on weights. They'll do one day long distance running, one day sprinting. One day they're looking at videos and discussing tactics, and then on the weekend they play their football.
Right,
So you've got to train. You've got to train the muscles, the musical muscles of the brain.
correct.
And Brahms used to say when he ran out of ideas, he'd sit down and do some counterpoint. And
Hay
um,
Haydn did the same thing.
yeah, and I still do that today. In fact, I'm giving a counterpoint lesson tomorrow. With Boulanger studying, I did a lot of harmony with her, but she taught harmony as if she was teaching counterpoint because it was all about the lines. It wasn't about what was going on vertically. It was much more about what was going on horizontally and what you do with voices.
Yeah.
But a lesson with Boulanger wasn't just that because it was like going to a guru. You'd cover the universe. Um, she taught me how to think about music, how to hear music. It was like having a new pair of glasses. You know, you go to the optician, you think you can see, and then you get these new glasses and you realize you couldn't see. So after about 3 months, it was like having a new pair of ears. You just hear music.
How long were the lessons?
Well, that's a very profound question.
I'm asking
So
you.
in the old days, in her youth, she would have her weakest students on Monday, and she'd work through the week and have her strongest students at the end of the week. And it wasn't quite like that in my day, but if you had the last lesson of the day, it could go on for any length of time. So if you were one of her students who she wanted to spend time with, you'd go at 6 or 7 in the evening, and you may end up staying for a couple of hours. Um, so it depends what slot you got as to how long your lesson was. They were supposed to be an hour, but she would often teach over that. Um, but she could be ruthless if you were not properly prepared for the lesson. Then she'd keep it jolly short. You had to work for her, and then she'd work for you.
Phil Glass describes it as being, that whenever he goes and he guest lectures at a college and people come up and, "Would you look at my compositions?" He says he knows within a fraction of a second whether they've studied species counterpoint or not,
Yeah.
and very few have.
Well, his chapter in his book, Words Without Music, his chapter on Boulanger is wonderful. If I was to write a chapter about, I mean, he was there like a decade before me, but if I was to write a chapter about studying with Boulanger, it would be almost word for word what he writes. He really captures her her love and her ruthlessness in equal measure, and he writes extremely eloquently about it. So it's worth looking at that chapter.
I regret I didn't come with you. I was frightened. Siegmeister made me completely frightened of her, and with the stories that he told. Um, it I know that my friend Mary Jane was there. It could have been about the same time you were there, but or
I
maybe
don't know
before.
her.
Very
No.
beautiful woman. She later married Anthony Newman, the great Bach,
Yes. Yeah.
Mary Jane
It
Newman. She's now a rabbi. She's really a remarkable, beautiful woman. But she talks about going to church with Mademoiselle.
well, we all went to once a year, we would get literally a black-edged invitation to go to the Trinité Church, which was also Messiaen's church, and we would have a memorial service for her sister, for Lily and her mother. And
Mhm.
Lily's Pie was always played at that service, and we would all shake Mademoiselle's hand at the end, and uh, you know, wish her long life, so to speak, as a Jewish person would do. Our condolences. And this was decades after her sister was died, but every year we had this service at Trinity Church.
Was Messier playing?
Not for that service. No, I used to go on Sundays to hear Messiaen playing at Trinity.
Oh, good for
Um,
you. So you really experienced it. So
oh, yes.
Malcolm, I know that I had the great pleasure in what had been a Roman Catholic church converted into an Anglican church to hear you conduct the Menuhin School strings
Yes, that's
in
right.
a little town. Um, and I remember also at the break getting these wonderful pavlovas from these wonderful ladies in town.
That's right.
Would
That's
you
right.
like another? It was just the best. But it was, it was a little something out of Monty Python. And I do remember also going to a wonderful gentleman's house who was one of your sponsors with his wife serving us, you know,
Mhm.
gin and tonics, you know.
Yes. Oh, you were in London. You were in England at the right time. So I'm the Menuhin School. I was director of music at the Menuhin School
That's right.
for 19 years, and actually most of my career, on and off, I was teaching there. So as soon as I finished studying with Boulanger in '77, literally the day I got back to England, I got this phone call from the school saying, "Could I go and do some teaching there?" So
Right.
I taught there in the late '70s when I was only in my mid-20s. Then I left because I went to America, and then I came back and taught a bit more. Anyway, then I went back as director of music, and as director of music, I was expected to coach and conduct the string orchestra, and we would do some very lovely concerts in the summer. We would go to Menuhin's festival in Gstaad and do concerts there, and around the country in England, and it was a great educational experience for the many generations of
Now you
students.
heard you knew Yehudi at the end of his life for a few years, right?
I knew him, yeah, quite well. I knew him a little bit before that, and I knew him very, very well in the last year of his life because he appointed me as director of music, and we worked very closely together in the last year. But I met him. Well, I had met him when I was studying with Boulanger, actually, when he brought the Bath Festival Orchestra to Paris. Um, and then when I was teaching at the school, uh, as this very young teacher, he would be down, and I would get to know him a little bit there. And rather bizarrely, I then was going to Stanford in California to study computer music. I left the school in my late 20s to go have 2 years at Stanford. And he said, "Oh, the week you're arriving in California, I'm conducting the opening concert at the new concert hall in San Francisco, the Louise M. Davies Hall. Why don't you come to the rehearsals and the concert?" And all I said, "Well, this is wonderful." So I went to these rehearsals, and it was a phenomenal experience. And I went to the concert. I went backstage to thank him afterwards. So this was September 1980, and below me there were his mum and dad. And he was
I know that
terrified as to what his mother and father had thought of his concert. And this was Sir Yehudi Menuhin in those days. He was my mentor and idol. And there he was, shaking and quivering as to what his mother and father, they were both in their late 90s. So that was quite extraordinary.
he was quite something. I met him once when he played in New York, and I was backstage with him. He was a great gentleman.
Yes,
One
he's,
thing, one thing that today is October 7th for those folks who don't know the day we taped this, which is a very tragic day in the history of our Jewish people. Malcolm and I share Judaism. And Malcolm, a thing I've always wondered was, and I know someone who actually was at the concerts that were given in the concentration camps right after liberation, in which Yehudi Menuhin was accompanied by a young pianist by the name of Benjamin Britten.
yeah, that's right.
And Britten spoke about this for the rest of his life, that he was very brutally affected
Yes.
by
Well,
being
Britain it wasn't supposed to be Britain. It was supposed to be Gerald Moore, who was a very famous accompanist.
correct.
And the young Britain had just come back from America, where he'd spent the war years, as you'll know.
With Peter
And
Peter.
he said to Yehudi, "Can I come and do it?" And Yehudi said, "Well, you'll have to ask Gerald Moore." So Britain contacted Moore and said, "Yeah." Moore said, "I don't want to go." Yeah, and so that's how Britain got the gig. Um, and
Britten was a phenomenal pianist. If you
yes,
there are duos with Richter,
yes,
Sviatoslav Richter, in which Britten, I think, outdoes Richter in playing. He was such a phenomenal player. But Yehudi's this I've always wanted to ask you this question. I
yes,
don't mind doing it on Interplay, especially on this terrible day. Yehudi said that because he later worked with Furtwängler,
yes,
whose career during
Yes.
during the Nazi side is very much criticized, as you well know. And so the question is, Yehudi's position was, oh, it was a bunch of gangsters running the Nazi regime, but there
Yeah.
had to be
Yeah.
rapprochement, and we had to have rapprochement with Furtwängler. Did you ever speak to Yehudi about any of that?
A lot. A
Please
lot.
tell us about it.
Because in London, there was a wonderful play by, Ronald Harwood, about the denazification of Furtwängler.
I know the play.
That was on, at the time that I was working with Yehudi in the late '90s, so I talked to him a lot about Furtwängler. And if you watch, Violin of the Century with Bruno Mont-Saint-Jean interviewing Yehudi, he talks about. I think he talks about it there. Certainly, there's some outtakes which you can now get of it, where he talks a lot about Furtwängler. You know, he adored Furtwängler. He
Yeah,
loved making music. He believed that Furtwängler got a lot of Jewish musicians out of Germany,
it's said.
uh, and a lot of the Berlin, what became the Berlin Phil, a lot of those players he got out of Germany, and that that he was not a Nazi in any way. But of course, he played at Hitler's birthday, and he did all sorts of things.
Well, you can see the Beethoven 9 with the swastikas all over the
Yeah.
place and shaking Goebbels' hand at the end. It's quite awful, and
But
he had to
he
build it.
loved Furtwängler, the man, and he loved playing with him. And I think one of Yehudi's greatest recordings is the Beethoven Violin Concerto with Furtwängler. I think it was in 1947 in Switzerland, in Zurich, I think. And so he adored the man, and Furtwängler was, had many foibles as far as I could make out. And Yehudi would accept them all because he was just so enchanted by the man's music making. Um, but Yehudi wanted to go back into Germany as the war ended because he wanted to. He believed that, music and love could save the world, and this was the way to mend
Well,
the
that's the way
situation.
he was, and I do remember meeting him. He was a great gentleman, but I've always wondered about that relationship and also about playing in the camps. I think his response was very different than the response that hit Benjamin Britten, which was very profound.
Well, we were, while I was director of music at the school for the Wiener Library in London, which is the library that houses all the documents about the Holocaust that were saved and got to England, about the whole of the rise of the Nazis. So we did this concert for them, and we recreated that concert that Yehudi did with Britain,
Wow.
with lots of our young students each playing one piece. So there was a Kreutzer sonata, and there was some Kreisler, and all sorts of things. So I had lots of young students, and it was a wonderful occasion. And Anita
Yeah,
Valfish, who was the cellist in, she was there. So if you read Yehudi's description of those concerts, everyone sat absolutely stony silence. It was this amazingly moving occasion.
yeah.
And she stood up at this Wiener Library reception and said, "This is complete nonsense. It was an embarrassment. Everyone was talking. No one knew who this man was. No one was listening." She's in her late 90s now, and she's still thriving.
This
Uh,
extraordinary woman.
yes, and but her description of the same event was very different from the one you'll read in Yehudi's autobiography.
Wow. Oh,
But
we
he
could
did.
talk
But
for hours about this.
Britain came home and was quite ill. He had a flu as soon as he got back, and he sat in bed and he wrote his holy sonnets of John Donne, "Death Be Not Proud," which is one of my favourite Britain pieces, and
That's
it's a
right.
Passacaglia, and that was written just after he came back from Belsen.
Malcolm, I do want to talk about you though, because I love you so much as a dear friend, and you're you're a very profound conductor. I mean, people don't realize how good the instrumentalists, the string players at the Yehudi Menuhin School are. They are the creme de la creme. The concert I heard you give was first rate in every way, and what
Thank
great
you very much.
players, many of whom have gone on to substantial careers. But let's talk about Malcolm, because I know you still very much teach at Guildhall now. But
Yeah. I mean, I've always, I get up every day and I make music, and it can be composing, it can be conducting, it can be teaching, and I do those three things. And that's what I do every day. I'm still trying to learn how to do it properly.
we all are.
Yeah,
This guy had it pretty natural, from what I can tell.
so they say.
So they say.
He had a very good teacher.
Yeah, he did. And they all studied Fuchs.
Yes, and Mozart hated studying, folks.
I know, but it was all good. I
Yeah,
teach Fuchs to this
yeah,
day.
yeah. Um, But I've always, I mean, I'm not the kind of composer who just wants to sit in an attic writing away. I
Although
love
you are in
working.
an attic now, it looks
I
like.
am in an attic now. This is where I sit and write, but I don't spend all my time here. But I like working at the Menuhin School as I did on and off for 40 years. Working with really young, talented people. So the Menuhin School, Yehudi formed it in '63. It was a kind of model. He went to the other thing he did in 1945, as well as going to Belsen, is he went to the Central School of Music in Moscow,
Right.
and he saw the education that young string players were getting in Moscow. And there were
Mhm.
things he liked about it, and there were things he didn't like about it. But it gave him the seed of an idea that one day he'd like to have a music school in the West. And it was nearly 20 years later before he opened the school in England. So and Boulanger had been terribly involved in sorting out the curriculum because Yehudi was not really an educationalist in that way.
Oh my.
And he was very close to her. They were very, very close. So I found for my composing and my conducting, I found working at the school with these young musicians very inspiring.
It
And
was an exceptional concert. I'll never forget it in that church. Now, let's talk about you as a composer, which is my great love of you, other than your performances, of course. You've written in every form pretty much.
yes, I mean, I tend to get asked to write quite a lot of choral music because I've done a lot of choral conducting. I've written some Jewish music because I'm kind of involved in the community, and then a lot of music for young people.
Right.
Um, but I don't like to be typecast. I like to be able to turn my hand to anything, you know.
So here we are, now both, I could say, in our 70s.
Mhm.
Why did we do this?
Well, I knew when I was 3 that that's what I was gonna do. So my parents said, "What do you want to be?" And I said, "A conductor," you know. My mother said, "Which bus do you want to be a conductor on?" And I said, "No, no, 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 music conductor." And she was a musician, and she said, "That's very, very difficult. You have to know about all the instruments, you know." And I thought, this 3-year-old, I thought for a moment, and I said, "Yeah, I'll be able to do that. That'll be all right." Um,
And your father, I remember, in your words, was in the schmata trade.
yes, absolutely. He was a
I tell people to this day, because my daughter and my stepson, Reese, my daughter Elena and my stepson Reese, are both in the schmata trade.
yeah.
In America, we say schmata, but when you said schmata, I thought it
Yeah.
was the most fancy word I've ever heard.
That's I mean,
I did meet your folks. I remember meeting them. They were
yeah,
lovely.
so many of that generation, that's what they ended up doing because
Yeah,
their parents came over as tailors or whatever from Eastern Europe.
that's right.
So my father, in a sense, his career was wasted. He was a very, very good with numbers. He'd have probably been an accountant of some kind. He was a very, very had a very good brain. So in a way, he was wasted. But my mother was a very fine pianist and piano teacher. But I always knew I wanted to do that. And then I suppose in my teens, I discovered composition, and composition became much more important for me than conducting. And I love conducting, but I never wanted that kind of big international conducting career. That never appealed to me.
You have
So
no time for writing.
no, no,
You don't.
no. You can't, and you can't. It's very. And you know, Bernstein used to write at 3 in the morning and
You know,
struggle out.
it ate Lenny up. I know that from
Yeah,
speaking to him. It ate him up, and all the interviews. And Tilson Thomas has said that through West Side Story, he was a substantial composer, and then boom, once he got the Philharmonic and then the Vienna, it was he had no time.
no, no.
But there's another thing, Malcolm. Conducting is a lot easier than writing a piece.
I mean, one of the things that really made me realize I didn't want to be, to strive for a big conducting career. I was actually with Lenny Bernstein because in my second year in Paris, Boulanger organised for us to go to a lot of his rehearsals and recordings and had one-to-one sessions. And in '68, when I was a teenager, I'd heard him conduct the New York Phil in Caesarea in Israel. Actually, they were doing their final tour with him, the Symphonie Fantastique, in this open air amphitheater overlooking the Mediterranean. It was phenomenal.
Weren't you also playing at that time with Jamie and Alex?
Yes,
Did
we were all at the Hilton Tel Aviv playing table tennis. Yeah,
That's what I thought.
the whole orchestra were there. And anyway, and he also conducted Roy Harris's Third Symphony, which I fell in love with and am still violently in love with. I think it's ridiculous it doesn't get performed in the regular repertoire.
Doesn't. He has a very good recording of it, but it
Yes,
doesn't get played.
Anyway, and so I'd heard him and the orchestra then, and then in 76, 77, he was doing it in Paris again with the French orchestra, pleading. I was at the rehearsals to try and get this French orchestra to play half decently, and on Berlioz, when the New York Phil had played it like they were like a Rolls Royce of an orchestra at the end of his tenure. And I thought, every time you get on the podium, you start again as a conductor with a new band. As a composer, hopefully you can. It's a bit like research. You're kind of developing from piece to piece, hopefully.
Malcolm, why did we do this?
Well, I can't do anything else.
I was asked this question by a young conductor friend of mine, Kalina Bovel, who was a dear friend. She says, "What do you compose?" And we were walking to have lunch, and I said to her, "Well, are you hungry?"
Yeah, you have to do, and Schoenberg says somewhere, a composer is someone who thinks in music. That's how you think, and
Hmm.
yeah, that's how my ideas come, and I like working with young people to see if to help them find their musical voice, um, and and that's kind of what Donatoni did with me. When I within a day of studying with him, I kind of started writing my music. I don't know what he did, but I
By
was
music. That's a very good phrase because you write Malcolm's music. When I just listened to your piano quintet, for example, that's Malcolm,
yeah,
nobody else.
yeah, and I don't know how or why. I think there's a kind of authenticity when you find a voice that is unique to you. You
It's
can't
wonderful.
look for it; it has to just come.
Yeah.
Um, and when I'm sketching a piece, I can tell it's not me, and all the stuff that gets thrown away is the stuff. It's like peeling an onion, getting rid of all the sketching is getting rid of all that stuff, so that hopefully you end up with an essence, which is maybe something someone's going to want to listen to.
Essence Malcolm.
Yeah, do what we can, and I've written a lot of music for. I've got next week. I'm going up to Leeds. I've got a piece that I wrote for young string players to do, which they're doing up in Leeds, and it's wonderful when you hear young string players having fun playing something that you've
Well,
created.
you're fun, you're erudite, you're my friend, and every time we're together, we just talk for hours and hours and hours,
Yeah.
which we could do on this interplay, but the broadcast is pretty much at a close. Malcolm, are there forms to end that you would like to write in that you may not have written in before?
I suppose I would like to do a kind of symphonic orchestral piece. A lot. I mean, this writing this short piece for Dayton has whetted my appetite to get back to doing a really a large scale piece. I've written a children's opera, which again I would like to do a full scale opera, but that's finding the right subject and the right collaborators.
Right.
As so, but and I mean, I like writing for my friends. I've got lots of friends who are performers, and I like writing for friends. So when friends ask me to write something, then that's when I get excited, and I go away and start writing. So, but well, some large scale pieces would be fun now. I feel ready to do it.
Malcolm Singer, my dear friend, this has been a joy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a
Great
pleasure
seeing you.
doing it with you.
This is Michael Shapiro for Interplay Conversations and Music. Thank you for joining us.